Hi, good morning, church family. Today I'm going to be reading from Ruth chapter 3 for you this morning. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies, and then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say, I will do." So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet, and he said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer. Yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning." So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." And he said, "Bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out." So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city, and when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "How did you fare, my daughter?" Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me. For he said to me, 'You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law.'" She replied, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today."
All right, good morning, everyone. I'll move that over there. Good morning. All right, everyone's here? Good. Good to see you. Welcome to Life Point Church. And welcome. If this is your first time visiting, we're glad that you are here. This is our English service, obviously, and we have a Thai service in the afternoon at 1 p.m. as well. And we have lunch in between those services, so you are welcome to stay for lunch as well. We have a Connect card that we want to make sure you get to fill that out so that we can be in touch with you and know how we can get to know you better. And also, on that Connect card, if you fill that out and during lunch you go into the cafe and hand that in, and you get a free drink on us, okay, as a way of saying welcome to you. And we just want to be a blessing to you and to let you know that we are glad that you are here. And so as you can see, we are in the middle of a series through the book of Ruth that we are calling Love and Loyalty. And Ruth is a book that has 4 chapters. We're on chapter 3, so we're almost towards the end. Next week is actually going to be our final week in the book of Ruth. And then after that, my family and I are going to be in the U.S. Throughout the summer for the months of June and July. And this will be a time for our family to refresh and reconnect with friends and family back in the U.S. And this will also be a time for me to go and to visit several of the Life Point campuses in the U.S., a chance for me to go and share with them about what the Lord is doing here at our church and what God is doing in Bangkok. And so I will be bringing your greetings to our brothers and sisters at Life Point in the States. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited for you because the time that I am gone over the 7 Sundays that I will be out, there will be guest speakers coming in every single week. And so I'm excited for that. They're all missionaries who live and serve here in Bangkok, and for various years. Some have been here shorter. Some have been here for a long time. But I know that they are going to bring the Word of God to you, and they will be a blessing to you. So I want to encourage you over the summer to continue to come and worship and fellowship and receive the Word of the Lord. And so, all right, let's get into the Word this morning. We are in Ruth chapter 3. And thank you, Brittany, for reading that chapter for us this morning. A quick recap for those of you who may be joining us in the middle of this story so that you are not so confused. What is going on, right? We just read that story. What was that all about, okay? So the book of Ruth, okay, quick recap. A woman named Naomi finds herself in a very difficult situation after the death of her husband and her 2 sons. She decides to go back to her homeland, and she comes back with one of her daughter-in-laws, a Moabite woman by the name of Ruth. And these 2 widows, as widows, especially back in that time in the ancient culture, their futures without husbands looked very bleak, right? And Naomi is bitter at God. She is angry at God. She believes that God has abandoned his steadfast love toward her. Okay, the word here is a word that if you hear a couple of weeks, Tyler preached on this word, hesed, and it's a word that means the steadfast love of God, right? This everlasting love of God. And actually, we're going to see this word throughout the book of Ruth, okay? And it becomes a theme in the book of Ruth. And so, but at this point, Naomi is bitter at God. She believes that God has dealt her a bad hand in life. Right, her husband is dead, her sons are dead, and this is not the way that she wanted her life to turn out. And so she felt like God has removed his kindness from her. It's a very dark time in her life. So they return, they go back to Bethlehem, where Ruth decides she's going to go and find work to support her mother-in-law, whom she has sworn an oath of love and loyalty to, right? She could have stayed in Moab, in her country, but she said, no, where you go, I will go. Your God will be my God. Your people will be my people. I am here with you all the way till the end. And so Ruth goes out to find work, and the Lord leads her to the field of a man by the name of Boaz, okay, who happens to be this wealthy man, this noble man, this virtuous man. And he also happens to be a distant relative. He happens to be a relative of Ruth's deceased father-in-law, Naomi's deceased husband, Elimelech. And Boaz treats Ruth with kindness, with hesed. And Boaz offers he offers her provision. He says, you can work in my field. Don't go anywhere else. Work in my field. He offers her protection. He says, I've told everybody, leave you alone. You're going to be safe. You can work in my fields. And so Ruth comes home after a day of work, and all this, grain that she was able to harvest. And she tells her mother-in-law, Naomi, hey, I was at work today, and look at what I brought. And so Naomi says, well, where did you work? Whose field did you work in? And she says, Boaz. Okay? And so at this point, Naomi gets excited because Boaz is a kinsman redeemer. Everybody say kinsman redeemer. Kinsman redeemer. We're gonna learn that word today, and we're gonna learn what that word means. Okay, because the news of this, that Boaz is the owner of the field where Ruth goes to work, this begins to restore Naomi's faith in God. She begins to have hope in her life again, and she prays God for his hesed. She praised God for his steadfast love. Look with me in chapter 2 of verse 20. This is the end of chapter 2. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness, this is the word there, whose hesed, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, the man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. And so at the end of chapter 2, Naomi tells Ruth to continue to work for Boaz until the end of harvest season, and that's where we are at, okay? So you're all caught up now. Okay, it's like when you're watching a show on Netflix and you forgot what the plot was, and there's that story recap at the beginning. That's what that was, okay? That's the story recap for you there, all right? And so before we move on to chapter 3, though, I want us to understand, why did Naomi get so excited? When Ruth said, yeah, I worked for Boaz, why did she get so excited? And why did she say, wow, he is one of our redeemers? I want to explain to you what a redeemer is, what a kinsman redeemer is in that time. Okay, so in ancient Israelite culture, right? The passing on of the family line, the passing on of inheritance, the passing on of property, and all that was very important. Okay? To have your descendants, to have your family line cut off was like you didn't exist anymore, okay? So it was very important for a family line to continue on. It's very important for the things that you have to be passed down on to your children and their children, okay? This is why having children was so important in the ancient culture. This is why when you read in the Bible about women who were barren, this is why it was such a shameful thing for them, because they weren't able to contribute children to the family, and particularly sons, okay? And in fact, if a man died without a child, his brother was actually obligated to marry his widow and so that she can bear children, and that first son, okay, becomes the heir of the dead man. Okay, this was a practice that was done in ancient times and in the Old Testament to ensure that the family line and the inheritance of the dead man would continue and would, be received by an heir. Okay, and this was called levirate marriage in the Old Testament. Okay, in the Old Testament, we also see this similar practice, which involves a relative called the kinsman redeemer, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, a redeemer is somebody within the family, within the tribe, who could redeem land and people back for a relative within that same tribe. And there were several scenarios for which when a redeemer would be called upon to perform their duty. For example, if a person was forced to sell their land or sell their property due to debt or due to poverty, then a redeemer was obligated to come and to buy back that property, right? To bring that wealth back into the family, to restore that person's wealth. They were to redeem land and redeem property. Or sometimes in ancient culture, a person may fall on hard times, they may go into debt, and they may be forced to sell themselves into servanthood, sell themselves into slavery. And a redeemer would come in and buy that person back from the slave owner, therefore restoring that person's freedom. Okay, sometimes, let's say if, for example, a person was killed, then a redeemer was obligated to seek justice and to seek restitution for that person and restore their dignity, okay? And so the point is this: the role of a redeemer is to bring back restoration, to restore that which is lost, from bondage to freedom, from debt to a clean slate, from hopelessness and destitution to hope and abundance, okay? And so often people in ancient culture would find themselves in difficult situations because of, various circumstances, and they would find themselves in these situations, and they would find themselves at the mercy of a redeemer who would come in and rescue them and bring about restoration. Naomi and Ruth were in such a situation. They were in this hopeless situation, and they felt as if they were without a future. They were widows, without husbands, and without children. And the family line of Elimelech was in danger of being cut off forever. Or so it seemed. Or so it seemed until Ruth told Naomi, I worked for Boaz today. I worked for Boaz. And that's when Naomi's hope began to well back up in her heart, because he's a redeemer. He is a redeemer. There's hope now, right? And so, again, Ruth had just began to work for this man, and he is a redeemer. There's hope, after all, for these widows. There's hope for Naomi. There's hope for Ruth, okay? And so what we see in chapter 3 is that in order for Naomi to secure this hope, she has to come up with a plan, and that's what she does, okay? She comes up with a plan to secure a future for her daughter-in-law. She takes a risk, and she is intentional about it. And so she comes up with this bold elaborate, risky plan. All right, look with me again in verse 1 of chapter 3. It says, Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young woman you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. In other words, Naomi looks at her daughter-in-law and she says, Honey, you've been taking very good care of me. You are loyal to me. You followed me all the way back from Moab, and you are now with me in Bethlehem. You've been taking very good care of me. I want a good life for you. I want a future for you. And she says, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? This word rest here in the Hebrew is an interesting word, and it refers to having security and stability in her life. Okay? And so essentially what she is saying is, I want you to have a good life. I want you to have a secure future. And she says, in order for you to do that, honey, you need a husband. Okay? You need a husband. And she says, I know just the right man for you. Boaz. What a man. What a man. What a mighty good man Boaz is, okay? He is the owner of this field. He is a noble man. He is a virtuous man. This is your guy, Ruth. Have you thought about Boaz? Have you thought about your boss? Okay, have you considered Boaz? And on top of that, guess what? He is our relative. He is a redeemer. Have you ever had anybody else set you up with somebody? Anybody? Yeah. Maybe you had that friend that liked to play matchmaker, you know, or maybe it was your mom, you know, kind of like Ruth here, right? This is what Naomi was trying to do. She was trying to set Ruth up with a man. You know, at that time, they didn't have Bumble. They didn't have Christian Mingle, Match.com. I don't know what the other sites are, okay? They didn't have those things. They had matchmakers, okay? And so Naomi was trying to make sure that Ruth had a husband, so she came up with this bold plan. She says, tonight, Boaz, he's going to be winnowing on the threshing floor. Remember in the first week, we talked about the process of harvesting grain, okay? And we talked about how this was the part of the process where they would separate the grain of the wheat and the barley from the husk, and they would go out, and usually on top of a hill, to what's called the threshing floor. They would take these bundles, these sheaves, and they would beat it against the floor to get the grain out of the husk. And then they would throw it up in the air, and the wind, the cool breeze of the night would blow the chaff, and then the grain would fall on the ground, and then they would collect it in a pile. And during this process, they would have so much grain piled up that whoever was out there winnowing this grain, they would have to stay out there and sleep out there next to the heap of grain to protect it from robbers and to protect it from animals and to, this is their crop. This is how they made money. And so someone would have to stay out there to protect what they had. And Naomi knew this. And she knew that Boaz would be out there. She knew that Boaz would be alone at night in a secluded spot. He was going to work all evening. After he worked, he would eat. He would have a little something to drink, and then eventually he would fall asleep. And so in this plan, Naomi tells Ruth that, okay, here's what you got to do, honey. You got to get cleaned up, get showered up, okay? Put on some perfume. Get your nails did, okay? Get dressed up, okay? And go to him at night. What's going on here, Naomi? All right? And so, now some would say that when Naomi tells her to get dressed up, that this was in order to look pretty and in order to perhaps seduce Boaz. I don't think that necessarily has to be the reading here, because what I believe what she is telling Ruth here is these are the steps to demonstrate to Boaz that Ruth was no longer in the mourning period as a widow, that she was to take off the garments of a widow and she would put on normal garments, and that this was a way to tell Boaz, I am out of this mourning period. I am now single and ready to mingle. All right, that was, you guys were supposed to say that, all right? Okay, and so she comes up with this plan. All right, I imagine Ruth listening to this plan. Okay, Mom, what do I do next, right? What do I do next, Mom, okay? So Ruth was told, okay, I want you to go, kind of sneak up on him, okay? See where he's sleeping, see where he lies down, uncover his feet. We'll talk about that. Uncover his feet, lay down at his feet, and wait for him to wake up. And then when he wakes up, you do whatever he tells you to do. Whoa, what's going on here, Naomi? Moms, is this what you would tell your daughters to do on a first date? School dance, right? What is Naomi telling Ruth to do here? Is Naomi telling Ruth to seduce Boaz into sleeping with her? On the surface, it may seem that way, and some people would interpret this text that way. Why? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One reason is this, that the threshing floor during harvest season, it was not uncommon during this time of the year. It was not uncommon for this to be a place where women of the night would visit men to offer their services at the threshing floor. And so a woman coming out to a man at night on the threshing floor could have been interpreted this way back in that time. Another reason why some would interpret it this way is because of the phrase, to uncover one's feet. The word here is not specifically feet, but it refers to the legs here, okay? And some would say that this is a euphemism for uncovering the lower body, more than feet, you know? And so that's how this could be interpreted, this phrase here, to uncover his feet. But I don't think that's what's going on here, and that's not the interpretation that I take on this passage. Okay? I don't think Ruth was out there looking to trap Boaz into a one-night stand. No, we are told that Ruth is a virtuous woman, that she is a worthy woman of character. In fact, how many of you are familiar with Proverbs chapter 31? Right? We're very familiar with Proverbs 31 as it describes a virtuous woman. Some translation says an excellent wife, okay? But it's a virtuous woman. Did you know that there's only one place in Scripture where that phrase is used to describe a specific person? And do you know where that is? Ruth chapter 3. Ruth is a virtuous woman. She is a woman of high character. And so it would have gone against her character. It would have gone against the way the Scriptures is portraying who she is for her to go out and try to seduce a man. Well, what about the part that says where she's supposed to uncover his legs? What does that mean? Well, one explanation is that it could mean that, remember, this is at night, the wind is coming through, and he's got a blanket on, and so this could mean that this was one way to expose his legs to the cool of the night, so that it would eventually wake him up, and he would be startled awake because of this. But even if it means that she was to put him in a compromising situation, when we read on in this story and we see what Ruth actually does and what Ruth actually says to Boaz when he wakes up, it clearly shows us that Ruth was not there to seduce him. She was there to propose to him. She was there to propose marriage to him. Listen, all marriage proposals have a certain element of risk, don't they? Anyone who's ever proposed to someone can relate to the nervousness and the anxiety of the moment. All the men right now are thinking back of your proposal and what you felt at that time, and there's always that risk. What if I say something wrong? What if I drop the ring somewhere? What if she says no? You ever see those viral clips, where they're in a big stadium somewhere, and it's all planned out. It looks sweet. It's on the Jumbotron, and then the girl's like, no, I don't want to marry you, right? Marriage proposals, they all have an element of risk, and what Ruth did and what Naomi came up with, this was risky indeed. But Ruth follows through with the plan. At midnight, Boaz, he wakes up and he's startled and he finds himself in a compromising situation. His legs are exposed and there's a lady lying at his feet. Okay? Can you imagine this? How would he respond? Would he think that she was a woman of the night? Remember, it's dark. He's startled. It's a bit groggy. You ever wake up in the middle of the night and you're like, where am I? What time is it? And who are you? There was one time, a long time ago, about 7 years ago, my wife and I were traveling. This is 2015. We took a summer to travel all throughout Europe, and we just went everywhere. You name the countries, we were probably there. And so this was at the end of like a month and a half of travel, and on our way back, we decided to come back through Toronto. I have family in Toronto, and so we're going to spend 2 nights in Toronto. And so we came back, and we arrived in Toronto at night, and our relative took us home. And again, we're all sort of jet lagged and tired from all the travel. And we get into their house, and my cousin says, "Okay, hey, I've prepared this room for you. Why don't you go and you sleep in this room?" And so we're like, "Oh, okay, all right. I just need a bed. I just want to lay down somewhere. I'm jet lagged." And so we lay down, and we're going to sleep. And in the middle of the night, I'm startled awake, and I'm jet lagged. I'm looking around, and I see something in the corner of the room. I see this small girl with dark hair. It's like the Grudge level stuff, you know what I mean? And I'm like, am I dreaming? Like, what's going on? And this person starts to walk slowly over, and I'm like, is this a nightmare? Like, what is going on? And I'm like, trying to get to Angie. I'm like, do you see this? Like, and this person comes and just stands right next to me. I'm laying in bed, and you know when you're half awake and you can't tell if you're dreaming or if you're awake, and sometimes your mind just tells you that this is the situation. And for some reason, my wife still laughs at me to this day. In my mind, I was like, this is a troll. Like, this is not a human. This is like a troll creature. I don't know why I thought that. But I'm freaking out. I'm scared. And this troll crawls into bed and lays down between my wife and I. I'm freaking out. I'm so scared. I decide to turn the other way. You know, sometimes when you ignore something, it just goes away, right? You know? Turn around, and I fall back asleep. I wake up the next morning, and I don't know if it was a dream. I was like, was that a dream or was that real? And I said, hey, did a troll come in bed with us last night? Like, what was that about? And Angie's like, oh, no, that's your niece, you know? So my niece, right, my relative's daughter sleepwalks. And that was the room that her dad, when he would work late at night, you know, he would end up falling asleep in that room. It's kind of like a spare room, and sometimes she would come into that room and sleep with her dad. And well, she was sleepwalking that night, and out of habit came and laid down thinking I was her dad. And it wasn't a troll, but it was my niece. I imagine Boaz, right? He wakes up startled in the middle of the night. It tells us it's midnight. He's groggy. He's trying to figure out. And then there's this person laying at his feet. And he says, so naturally he says, who are you? And so she says, it's me, Ruth. I am Ruth, your servant, your maidservant. That's what she says. And I wonder what is going through his mind at this moment. Ruth, what are you doing here? This is the threshing floor. This is at night. Ruth, why are you here? Remember, for Ruth, this was a risky plan. Now, we know that Boaz was a noble man, that he was a man of high character. He was a virtuous man, but he is still a man. A man who wakes up in the middle of the night with a woman lying at his feet. So how would he interpret her actions here? It was risky. Boaz could have had a moment of weakness, and he could have taken advantage of her that night. Or he could have become offended at her actions, and he could have chased her away angrily. You know, if it doesn't work out, Ruth would be out of a job, and her reputation would be ruined. But before Boaz can say anything else, Ruth made herself very clear. No, Boaz, this is not what you think. This isn't what it looks like. This is not why I'm here, Boaz. What she said next was shocking, and it was bold. She said, marry me. Well, that's basically what she said. Verse 9. This is what she says, verse 9. So he said to her, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. And this sounds strange to us. When's the last time you said to somebody, hey, spread your wings over me? It's strange to us, but this was crystal clear to Boaz. He understood exactly what she was saying, because back in that time, this gesture of a man covering a woman with his garment was symbolic of a declaration of protection and provision for her as his wife. So to ask a man to spread his wings of protection over you was a way of asking him to marry you. Marry me, she said. Marry me. Because you can. Because you are a redeemer. Look, Ruth definitely went off script here, right? Well, Ruth, that wasn't part of the plan, okay? Naomi, what did she tell Ruth? She said, go and lay down when he wakes up. You just tell him exactly. He's going to tell you exactly what to do. And instead, Ruth is telling Boaz to marry her based on the fact that he is an eligible redeemer. This is bold. This is extraordinary. This is shocking. She broke all the social norms here. Here is a servant demanding that her boss marry her. Here is a Moabite making a demand of an Israelite. Here is a woman making a demand of a man. Here is a poor person making a demand of the rich. She broke all the social norms here. She was taking great risk in hopes of redemption. Ruth took a great risk in hopes of redemption. Well, how would Boaz respond? Look with me in verse 10. He says, may you be blessed by the Lord, by Yahweh. This is the personal name of God here. May you be blessed by Yahweh, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are, and here's that word, a worthy woman. When I read this, I think of that scene in the movie Frozen. Okay, I know. Hey, I'm a girl dad, so I've seen that movie more times than I should, where the guy says, hey, can I say something crazy? He says, will you marry me? And she goes, can I say something crazier? Yes. Remember that scene? Okay, this is like, bang, you know that one? Okay, all right. And so, but Boaz's response was just as surprising as Ruth's bold request. Instead of shooing her away, you're not worthy, Moabite, servant, you just glean the fields, okay? Instead of shooing her away, he praised her. He said a blessing over her. He says, may you be blessed by Yahweh. And he called this marriage proposal that she was, that she was proposing to him, he called this a great kindness. There's that word again. He praised her hesed, her love, and her loyalty. Yes, she has shown love and loyalty and kindness to Naomi by leaving Moab and by leaving her country and her gods and coming to Bethlehem to take care of her mother-in-law. But this act, Boaz says, this last kindness is greater than all of that kindness that she has already shown and that he has known her for. This is greater. Yes, she's been taking care of her mother-in-law. She's been selfless. She's been loyal. And now, instead of seeking marriage for herself with perhaps a younger husband, instead of starting a new life for herself, she is seeking a husband in a redeemer. Don't miss this. Ruth could have came in and said, I'm going to find somebody. But instead, she is seeking marriage with a redeemer and someone who could provide an heir for Elimelech's family so that his family line would not come to an end. So therefore, Boaz agreed. He said yes. She proposed and he said yes. Yes, you are right. I am a redeemer. Yes, I will marry you. But there's one thing. There's someone else who's a closer redeemer than me. There's someone else who is next in line. And if he redeems you, great. I'm happy for you. But if this guy doesn't redeem you for some reason, then I promise you, Ruth, as the Lord lives, I promise you, I will redeem you. I will marry you. Don't worry, Ruth, you will be taken care of. Whether it's someone else that redeems you or whether it is me that redeems you, you will be taken care of. And you know what? We're going to take care of this first thing in the morning. But I need you to stay the night. Why did he ask her to stay? Some would say, oh, what's going on here, okay? Why are you asking her to stay the night? Listen, this was not an invitation for intimacy. Boaz's intentions were pure. He was protecting her. He was protecting her both from physical danger and also he was protecting her reputation. For her to leave, to go out in the middle of the night, this would have been dangerous for her. And also, if anyone saw her leaving the threshing floor in the middle of the night, what would they think? Right? And so he was protecting her reputation. And so she stays the night. The next morning, she leaves before it gets light enough for anybody to be able to notice. And Boaz sends her home with 6 measures of barley to take home to Naomi. And interestingly, when Ruth gets home, she reports that Boaz said that the reason why he wanted to send her home with more barley, with grain, was so that she would not return to her mother-in-law empty-handed. Empty-handed. This is interesting because there's one other place where this phrase in the Hebrew is used in this book, and it's when Naomi said, "I went away full and I came back empty," describing herself. Describing how she felt about, the fact that she felt that God had abandoned her, that his loving kindness was gone. And she said, I'm an empty person. I have nothing left. And Boaz says, go back to your mother-in-law because you're not going to go back empty-handed. You're not going to go back empty-handed. Ruth is returning. And Naomi, you will not be empty any longer. God is working his plan in your life. God is going to restore. Hopelessness will be filled with hope again. Those who have been abandoned will be redeemed. And so Ruth gets back. She arrives at the house, and Naomi, who probably didn't sleep a wink all night, says, well, how'd it go? Are you engaged? Did he put a ring on it? And so she says, no, not yet, but I will be married. That's been promised, either to Boaz or to another redeemer. Mom, your plan worked. And that's where we are in chapter 3. What an incredible story, right? What an incredible story. What a dramatic story. I love the intentionality here on Naomi's part, right? She was intentional about securing a future for Ruth. She wanted to make sure that she could help Ruth move on from a period of mourning and a period of hopelessness to a new season of hope. She says, take off the widow garment and get yourself dressed and put something else on. She was determined, even in her own pain, even in what she was going through, she was determined to seek rest for her daughter-in-law. What can we learn from this? About how we can be intentional in helping others, right? Just as Naomi helped Ruth in her time of trouble to secure a future for her, are we intentional about helping others move on from pain and seeking hope in their lives? Or do we only seek our own joy and our own happiness? Or do we seek the goodness and blessings of God for other people? And what faithful obedience on Ruth's part. Right, her mother-in-law comes up to her and tells her about this crazy, risky plan. And Ruth's response was, all that you say, I will do. It wasn't like, Mama, that sounds crazy. Right? Like, Mom, you know how that's going to make me look? Okay. No, she said, all that you say, I will do. And even if this meant risking her safety, risking her livelihood, risking her reputation, she was obedient. What can we learn from this obedience? And will we have the same faithful obedience to God when he asks us to take steps of faith that seems risky and seems crazy? When the path that God is leading us on doesn't make sense, when there seems to be a lot of risk to either safety or reputation, will we also respond and say to God, all that you say, I will do? And what integrity on Boaz's part, right? He could have took advantage of that situation. He was in the position of advantage in every way. He was the man, she was the woman, he was the boss, she was the servant, he was the Israelite, she was the Moabite. He was in a position to take advantage of her, and he could have, but he didn't. Because Boaz is a man of integrity. He is a worthy man. He always sought to do the right thing in the eyes of God. What can we learn from Boaz's actions in this story as well? Do we live our life in the fear of God? Do we seek to do the right thing always in the eyes of God in every area of our lives? Not just in the public areas, not just in the places where people can see, but in the secret places when others don't see. Or do we seek to do the right thing? Do we seek to be a people of integrity who want to please the Lord and who live in the fear of God? And lastly, when I think of this story, I see this woman who comes and she casts herself at the feet of a Redeemer. She is at the mercy of this Redeemer. He is the one that is going to restore her and bring her hope. And I can't help but think about how that applies to our Christian life as well, that we come to Jesus with nothing to offer. We come to him and we lay ourselves at his feet. And we long for him to redeem us from our sins, to bring us out of bondage into freedom, to restore us from hopelessness to hope and abundant life. And we're going to talk a lot more about that next week in chapter 4 when we see the redemption of Ruth. But this is where we are. We are rounding the corner in this story. Darkness is turning into light. Tragedy is turning into hope. Loss is turning into restoration and redemption. But we aren't quite there yet. In chapter 3, it closes with Naomi saying to Ruth, let's wait and see how this thing turns out. And that's what we are going to do. We're going to wait and see how this thing turns out in chapter 4 next week. Will Ruth be redeemed? Is it going to be Boaz, or is it going to be this other person who is a closer kinsman? We'll find out next week. Let's pray.